Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI's, women journalists are making their places known in newsrooms across the U.S. Representation of AAPIs in newsrooms and their equality, however, still have a long way to go. According to RTDNA, Radio Television Digital News Association's 2020 research and their Newsroom Diversity Report, Asian American women in U.S. newsrooms is only 3%. In this video, I will highlight the issues that women AAPIs are experiencing in newsrooms that have been around since the 1970s, with Connie Chung at the helm, along with other journalists that soon followed her. Many of these issues are still relevant today. In the documentary Slaying the Dragon by Deborah Gee, the director touches on the stereotypes perpetuated by Asian American women on television and in the movies, thereby creating a false depiction of Asian American women. Connie Chung is the first AAPI woman journalist to co-anchor a national news program. She paved the way for other Asian American women reporters. As Chung made a name for herself, newsroom executives were looking to replicate her style and persona. The stereotypes of Asian American reporters became an issue that was extremely problematic in the 80s for other journalists attempting to maintain their own identities and find their voices. Emerald Yee, who became a journalist in her own right, felt she was hired because executives wanted her to look like Connie Chung.
And female Asian reporters have been featured in Hollywood scripts.
This is Tracy Sue, WKXT News, Mott Street, Chinatown.
I'm Connie Chung, Bloomingdale's, where a dramatic chapter in Soviet-American relations is being played out.
Besides the Susie Wongs, we now have the new stereotype, Connie Chung's. I mean, they're very specific about it. And even to the point, I've done a little experimenting on my own, and I've told particular clients how to style their hair. They'll go in looking like Connie Chung, and that's the one that gets picked.
Good evening. The nation's third largest oil company filed for bankruptcy protection today.
San Francisco newscaster Emerald Yee discovered that the one who gets picked for the job in the real world of news is also the one who fits the Asian anchorwoman stereotype.
When CNN flew me out for a job interview, I remember the weeks leading up to that, I was really nervous. I wanted to really demonstrate to them that I was a very serious news person, because this was a 24-hour news network that I was being interviewed at. So I read the New York Times from cover to cover. I went through all my old journalism books. I even read up on how to be interviewed for jobs so I wouldn't be thrown off by any questions. I was ready for anything. Then I walked into the head of the news division, his office, and the first thing he said to me was, "You look different," which didn't surprise me. We all look different in person. He goes, "Your hair, you've cut your hair." Well, that's not the look that we saw on your audition tape. And in jest, I said, "Well, I can always grow it back." And he said, "How long would it take?" He was serious about it. And I kind of figured out what they wanted me to look like was Connie Chung. They just were never quite satisfied. Then it was my makeup. They said, "Well, we're going to send you to a makeup artist to try to make you look more exotic," which infuriated me. Although I didn't say anything, I just kept it to myself. But I had a lot of repressed anger about that.
And striking Greyhound bus drivers say there will be violence if the company leaves the driving to non-union employees.
But I sensed that I was gradually losing my own self-identity through this.
I also spoke with Julie Patel-Liss, a Cal State LA associate journalism professor, and she gave her insight about the challenges that AAPI women reporters are experiencing.
I think maybe if you might start noticing some themes in what Asian American journalists, just because I was on the board of the Asian American Journalists Association in San Francisco, also in Florida, and now of course in LA. And so I've seen sort of from our members and from speaking to other friends who are API journalists, I can sort of spot some trends of issues that we deal with that we perhaps have in common. Also, I did something called the Executive Leadership Program through AEJA, and that's like a week-long intensive program for API newsroom leaders, where we get together and we talk about the particular challenges that we face and how to overcome them. And so some of those include, one, this idea that we might be perceived as being sort of passive and keep our heads down and not speak up for ourselves and for our own rights. And because we may be perceived this way, we may be passed up for promotions, or we may be asked to do more work than other people because, we're thought of as people who are not going to complain, because of stereotypes, right? There's stereotypes that are out there. And then also, partly it could be our culture that also affects these stereotypes, because there's, maybe there's like a kernel of truth in some of them, in the sense that, if you're raised by families who are taught to really respect their elders, and certainly I can say that for the Indian culture, we're taught to really revere and respect our elders, and not to talk back as much to our elders, to kind of respect them. So if you're raised in that kind of a family or in a structure, then when you go to the workplace, where we're taught to respect our elders, respect our teachers, we may not speak up as much. We may, in fact, not do that. You see what I'm saying?
Of course.
And so then we may be passed up for things that we should be getting based purely on the kinds of stories we're getting and the hard work we're doing. And certainly I've experienced this in my own career, and I'm sure the other people you interview will be able to provide you with anecdotes.
Miss Liss touches on the notion of stereotypes and cultural perspectives that form these ideas of who AAPIs are in newsrooms. I can't help but wonder, is there a connection between stereotypes and cultural perspectives? I also spoke with Teresa Watanabe of the Los Angeles Times, and she recounts her time as a younger reporter in 1981, connecting with other AAPI reporters as a support system to deal with the obstacles she has faced, especially dealing with upper management.
There was just a sense back in 1981 that we wanted to network with each other. We wanted to connect with each other, because sometimes it's harder for Asian Americans, especially when you're so outnumbered, to really talk to other, especially managers who don't share your cultural background, who don't know anything about you, about where you're coming from, who don't know the cultural mores. I think Asian American umbrella is so huge, but I'm Japanese American, and are you of Asian descent?
I am, yes. I'm half Filipina and half American.
Oh, okay. So I don't know. I think from my Filipino friends tell me it's sort of similar, where, we don't necessarily speak out and speak up so forthrightly. And like in the Japanese culture, there's a saying that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So we're sort of taught not to speak up and not to stand out. And, that's a liability in the world of journalism, right? Because you have to speak up. And I remember when I went to the San Jose Mercury News, and there would be all of these job postings, and I would be too scared to ask for them, because I just didn't have the confidence. And finally I did say, okay, I want to apply for this job. I think at that time it was being the LA bureau chief. And the editors, the white editors, actually said, well, we've been waiting for you to speak up and tell us what you want to do next. And I'm like, well, why did you ask me? But, those are like a different set of cultural expectations, right? Like as an Asian American, you think you work hard, keep your nose to the grind, do good work, and you will be recognized. The editors will tap you and say, hey, you're doing well. Do you want to do this? That's what I would have expected. But they were coming from the perspective of, well, no, you got to speak up. You got to ask for what you want. And if you don't speak up and ask for what you want, and everyone else is doing so, you're going to get left behind, right? So that was a kind of really telling moment for me, where I said, okay, I just can't take for granted this cultural expectation that my hard work will be recognized. I'm going to actually have to get vocal and start asking for what I want.
In a white-dominated industry, sometimes feels like an uphill battle. Speaking up for yourself and going after the big stories, especially coming from a seasoned writer like Miss Watanabe. This is meaningful and inspiring to me. Go after what you want. As an AAPI budding journalist that speaks directly to my heart, Miss Watanabe is a seasoned journalist that has taken the path that I have not yet traveled. Her experience in the newsroom has given me hope as an Asian American woman. Emily Myung, a producer for the KERA station in Texas, recognizes the lack of diversity in newsrooms across the U.S. She also speaks about her own experience about the challenge of being one of the few AAPI producer reporters in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This idea of being the token Asian as the one that has to represent an entire community is a position she does not want.
But yeah, I mean, it's no secret that public media has a diversity and inclusion issue that goes a lot deeper than the numbers. You can look at NPR's statistics, that they put out every single year, and it's really frustrating because it needs to change, and the industry has a lot it needs to do to progress. Public media obviously isn't the only sector in, journalism that needs to advance, but public media has historically been very white, and you can see that across the landscape. So I've become pretty interconnected with the Asian American journalists in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it's because, unfortunately, there are so few of us that we have to kind of know each other. But yeah, I think in journalism, it's challenging because something that I was really passionate about last year was covering the Asian American community that was really undercovered based on the proportion of the population in my area. And it's really challenging to navigate that when you feel that alone and your experience is that marginalized, because you're trying to portray it to the best of your ability, but then you're human. So then things come up like, oh, am I being typecast as the Asian journalist who's only covering the Asian things, even though these are global issues? This is an important issue that just should be covered anyway. But navigating those challenges, there's no clear, no one gives you a rubric for that, right? And there's no plan. And it's not like I have an Asian American senior reporter or somebody who can guide me. So it was having to learn that for myself and learn my boundaries and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I'm really proud of a lot of the work that I've been able to do here. And to the credit of the people around me, it's because most of the people that I work with are incredibly empathetic and they have a really strong DEI mindset. But on the other side of things, there is a lot that needs to grow and improve. And yeah, I mean, where essentially there is this newsletter that gets put out and features the coverage or the storytelling of one of the reporters or producers in the Texas newsroom. And this was, I think it was a week after the Atlanta shootings last year. And all of a sudden, this person who is a white man reached out to me about it, and was like, hey, we'd love to feature you in this edition. And it was a really awkward and strange experience because, one, I'd never talked to him before. He'd never interacted with me before. And I felt really used. And I was really up in my feelings thinking oh, maybe I'm overthinking this. I feel really uncomfortable. Why now? Of the entire year plus that I've worked here, does he want to feature me now? And I think before the Atlanta shootings, I wouldn't have said anything because I'm young. I'm a young producer, reporter, and I don't want to seem difficult, which is very easy to get typecast in this industry as an Asian American woman, but or very easy to get typecast like that. But after that happened, I was like, no, I have to stand up for myself, and I can't tolerate feeling this way, even if the person isn't intentionally doing this. So I spoke up to my editor and basically escalated up the chain of command where the person was notified. And he came to me and told me that he didn't realize the context, or that he didn't think about how the shootings would affect me and stuff like that. And I understand if that was his thought process, but he admitted that, yeah, that was a total oversight and that's a problem that he needs to work on. Because I'm like, how could you not think the fact that Asian women are being targeted and 6 women just got killed, and then all of a sudden you want to feature me, and I'm one of maybe 2 or 3 Asian American woman in this system, that wouldn't hurt my feelings and make me feel like I'm a token that's being propped up. And yeah, it was incredibly hurtful. And yeah, I'm glad that I spoke up about it.
After hearing all these stories from AAPI women reporters, I can't help but think that these issues and challenges they face are not going to go away tomorrow. I asked Ms. Patel her thoughts about how we can encourage this change.
And like I said, like you could actually look at, if you wanted to, you could look at how the LA Times has achieved what it's achieved in terms of, it's not quite there yet in terms of it's not completely representative of the population yet, but it's very close. It's very close to representing the API population in the county.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, so you could actually...
So the representation is gradually, it's growing, I guess, to represent...
It's growing, and it's much better than it is at probably every other newsroom in the country, but just to be safe, I would say most other newsrooms in the country.
Working on this story has really opened my eyes to the current plight of AAPI women journalists. It is my hope that the work I have uncovered will also encourage other journalists of color to strive for these necessary changes for the betterment of newsroom equity and representation.